Hey guys, welcome back to Fix It Friday. So this week we're going to be completing our quest to build the ultimate Sega Nomad. So this is the second part of a two-part series. If you missed part one, go back and check that out real quick. But just to give you a brief summary, what we did last week was we took a stock Sega Nomad and we installed the RGB DRV screen. This is a modern screen replacement which uses RGB video, and that's the highest quality analog video signal, to produce a really outstanding image. This mod also has an on-screen display, which you can use to do all sorts of things to process the image even further and make it look better. Apart from that, we also replaced the electrolytic capacitors on the system, and we also installed a brand new speaker. And so today, what we're going to be doing is installing the triple bypass mod. This is a modification that was made by Mobius Strip Tech and several others, and what it does is it bypasses the original audio and video circuits and routes it through this board, and it produces an even higher quality image and better sound than the original circuit. So for those of you guys that don't know, there's lots of versions of the Sega Genesis out there, and they vary quite a bit in terms of their video quality and their audio quality. So this mod here brings them all to the same high quality standard. So let's go ahead, take this thing apart, and get started. Alright, so let's get started taking this thing apart. I've gone through how I disassemble this in previous videos, so you can take a look at that. Taking apart a Nomad is simple. You basically just need a Phillips screwdriver and a game bit screwdriver to remove one screw. And then what we're going to do is we're going to focus on this half of the system first. As you can see, I have a whole bunch of capacitors that I've labeled, and this was from the previous video as well. These all need to be removed because the first thing to do for this modification is to cut off the original video and audio signal. So I'm going to go ahead and take this board out, and let's go ahead and remove all of these capacitors. Okay, so now that those electrolytic capacitors have been removed, there's still a few other components we need to take off on this board. So I'm going to be removing this little component right here, and then these two little ceramic capacitors right over here. Okay, and I just also wanted to mention a few other things. If you're doing the triple bypass and using the stock screen, then you actually don't need to remove these three capacitors right here. However, of course, I have a new screen, so because of that, these three had to be removed. I also optionally removed these two capacitors here. These supply power to the audio amplifier, but I decided to remove them because the audio amplifier isn't being used, it's being bypassed, so there's no point in keeping these capacitors to provide power to the chip when it's not being used for anything. But again, it's totally optional. You can potentially leave these two here, and again, if you're using an original screen, these three can be kept. Alright, so now what I'm going to do is flip over this board, and I'm going to install some new components on the opposite side. Alright, so for our next step, we're going to come onto this side of the board, and what we're going to do is we're going to install these little daughter boards right here. This one goes here on the Genesis AV multi-out, and so this is going to take the bypassed video and feed it over to the port. And then this little guy here is going to go over the headphone jack and the volume wheel, and this is going to provide the bypassed sounds to either the mono speaker or to the stereo jack over here. So we're going to go ahead and do that real quick, and then after that I'm going to go ahead and put the sub PCB away because I just want to keep it out of the case as little time as possible, just to avoid the possibility of getting fingerprints and dust onto the screen. All right, so I've gone ahead and installed these two daughter boards, and I just wanted to mention a couple of things that I learned in the process of doing it. So one is that you should really install this flex cable before putting this one in, just because the corner of the 3D printed mount just kind of gets in the way. Of course, if you're not using one of those, you won't have this issue, but just bear in mind that it's a bit of a tight fit here. So if you can install this first before soldering, that'll save you a little bit of time and effort. I ended up just removing this off camera and then installing it and reinstalling everything. Over here you can see these are the RGB lines that are for the RGB DRV screen, so I just reattached them on top over here. What I found also is that these ground posts over here are they make it a little bit harder to sit this board flush against the original board, so you may need to trim these three in order to do that. So that's what I ended up doing. I trimmed all three of them, and then that allowed me to push this down right up against the Nomad board, and then that meant that I got nice connections on all of these pins. If these pins aren't connected properly, then you're not going to necessarily get video or sound. So that's all set, and so we've got one more thing to do on this board before we move on to the other board, and that has to do with this Sony CX-A RGB encoder chip. So in order to complete the video bypass, I have to lift up 3 pins on here, which are the RGB out that normally go to the multi-out. So by doing that, I'm going to be severing the original RGB circuit, and yeah, we're going to take care of that right now. Alright, so now we've moved on to the main PCB, and just like before, we have a whole bunch of components to remove. This time it's a bunch of surface mount components here, and this is part of the video bypass portion. If you're not doing the video bypass, then you can leave all of this alone. However, there are 2 components that no matter what you're doing, you definitely have to remove. So you have to remove this R5 and R6 over here, and you have to replace them with a bridge of solder going from point to point. If you have difficulty with that, you can also use like a small component leg or something like that to make the bridge. Okay, so the next thing we're going to do is we're going to install this little flat flex cable, and this is part of the whole video bypass component. So you see I've placed it right over the area where we already removed all of those surface mount components. And note the orientation that I have it. So it goes from the upper rightmost pad, and then it bridges these bottom left pads. And it does that for R, G, and B, presumably. So this is maybe red, green, blue. And so you want to make sure that you have everything aligned really carefully. And I've actually already tacked this section down into place just because it's really difficult to position this thing on camera. So once you solder this into place, you also want to take a multimeter and you want to test continuity between the 5-volt line and the ground line. That's these 2 pins right here. So if either of these 2 pins is making a contact with any of these 6 points, and you've got some kind of a bridge, and you need to go ahead and go back and clean up your work and make sure that that bridge is gone. Otherwise, you're not going to have a good video signal. All right, so let's go ahead and solder this flat flex cable into position. All right, so we're getting to the finish line now, and there's just a couple more things that we need to do. One thing that we need to do is re-enable Sega Master System sound functionality, and that's a rather simple process. All we have to do is we have to solder in a wire right over here at pin 45. You can see that pin 45 is actually marked by a little white dot over here. So I'm going to probably do that off camera just because it's easier to do this with a microscope because this is rather small. I use a piece of 30 gauge Kynar wire for this because it's tiny and easier to control. So you just solder one wire from pin 45 over here, and then you've got to come over onto the cartridge slot and you solder the other end of that wire to this pin right here, and that's going to enable Sega Master System sound. So that's usable with a flash cartridge like the Mega EverDrive Pro or the Mega SD. We're also going to send over 2 wires to the triple bypass board, and so let's go ahead and just do that now. We're just going to solder them to these 2 points on the cartridge slot. This is B1 and B3 on the cartridge slot. All right, so we're basically done now, and just wanted to show you these connections here. So here's the wire going from this point on the cartridge slot all the way over here to the 315-5700 chip to pin 45. And so that gives us our Sega Master System. And I believe that this connection here, this is going to be for the Sega CD sound. So now let's go ahead and reassemble the back PCB here. Oh, and then one more thing. You want to put this flex cable in with the blue stripe facing up towards you. Okay, so we're basically at the end now, and all I have to do is just wire in B1 and B3 over here, and then we're going to go ahead and get these flex cables attached into position. Alright guys, so we're back and I've got the Sega Nomad connected up to my television using the OSSC, and then I have it off to the right on the corner over there. And so hopefully you can see very clearly that the RGB from the triple bypass looks absolutely outstanding when you send it off to a modern display. It also looks really good on the RGB DRV, but I do have to admit that there isn't much of a change on its internal display. It only really shines when you're using this external display like you guys can see over here. One very big difference too is that the sound improved pretty significantly, especially on the Nomad itself. So the Nomad has a mono speaker, and that's what it uses for its, external audio. And I could also tell there was a problem with the original sound circuit. There was no like right channel audio, I just had left. Now everything is coming in perfectly mixed and balanced and sounding great. Sounds good on the screen here as well. So yeah, I really think that, if you plan to use your Sega Nomad a lot, the combination of the RGB DRV and this triple bypass really can make it like the best possible portable Genesis you could ever imagine. So I highly recommend this. It's an awesome modification to do. And not only that, with the Mega SD, as you guys can see here with an EverDrive Pro, you get even more. So you can get Sega Master System games running on this thing. You can get Sega CD, which is what we've got here. So yeah, the sky is kind of the limit with this thing. It's awesome. Alright guys, so that's it for this project. If you like this kind of content, then consider subscribing to the channel. I've got videos out like this every Friday. And then of course, if you have a system that you need modified or repaired, you can always reach me directly at oneuprestorations.com. Alright guys, thank you very much for watching. I appreciate the support, and I will see you in the next one.